you would have become philosophical. But we just keep chasing shadows. This shadow, this thing I obtained, for a while you're excited and happy. Again the same emptiness. Again you're back to square one. And this goes on until your system slowly starts breaking down. And then that's not the end. Again, as Shankaracharya says, Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jathareshayana. Iha samsare bahudustare. Krupaya pare pahi murare. Shankaracharya says this samsara, this repeated journey of birth, death and lying in the mother's womb is extremely mystifying, mysterious. Save me, O Murari, from this chain of birth and death. So, emptiness. The first stream of thoughts that emerges from you is attachment. Like you see here, you feel a void, an emptiness. The first stream of thoughts that come is called attachment, and when these thoughts get consolidated, it is called a desire, kama. This desire then, there is one of two possibilities. One is the desire will get fulfilled, the other is desire will not get fulfilled. What happens? When desire gets fulfilled, it leads to greed. That's not the end of it. You want more and more. If even your greed is fulfilled, it leads to delusion, moha. You can see it in people who've achieved a lot, and the faster they achieve it, the greater is the moha. You know who I am? That kind of attitude. And then, however much you obtain, there will always be someone who has more than you, so you're envious of people who have more than you and arrogant towards people who have less than you. What you need to understand is that all these modifications create a lot of mental agitations and sorrow for you. The second possibility, the desire gets frustrated. When the desire gets frustrated, there is an interruption. Something comes in the way of your obtaining the object of desire. Your thoughts which are going towards the object of desire get deflected, and this is called anger towards the interruption. So this of course causes a lot of stress. Now, desire and its modifications, once you identify with the desire, it then binds you to the world. Binds you to the world, and then you get tossed by the dvandvas, the pairs of opposites. The world is nothing but a mixture of pairs of opposites, dvandvas. There's profit, there's loss, there's joy, there's sorrow, there's birth, there's death, there's honor, there's dishonor, and throughout your lifetime, you meet with pairs of opposites. It is not the dvandvas that trouble you. What troubles you is your desire. So what happens is, you position yourself in such a way that only when the environment is conducive for the fulfillment of your desires are you happy. The moment the environment turns unconducive, you are unhappy. So in fact, the more desires you cultivate within you, you are only setting yourself up for sorrow. You don't realize that. So, there is wanton cultivation of desires. Not only from within do you cultivate, but the environment also promotes desires. By marketing, very aggressive marketing and advertising techniques, what is happening is, even if you don't have a desire to buy a new car, you see all these ads and they come and give you fancy schemes and 0% interest and first EMI is only 4,000 rupees or whatever it is. Don't hold me to it. That even when you have no desire to buy a car, you fall. This is what happens. And then you get caught in this dvandvas, you get tossed by the dvandvas. This is the autobiography of each one of us. So what is he saying? He said, liberate yourself. And how do you liberate yourself? By gaining knowledge of your fullness. Now, what Vedanta tells us, what the Bhagavad Gita tells us is that if you were really empty and you were going out to fulfill yourself, it's perfectly legitimate. But the truth of the matter is, that even while you're feeling this gnawing sense of emptiness, you are in fact full, whole, W-H-O-L-E, not H-O-L-E. Paripurna. Purna means full. Paripurna, superlative. Totally, completely full. You're looking at me with grave doubt. You're probably telling yourself, all this time you said you were sensible, now you're making disastrous statements. I don't blame you, because the problem is that you are ignorant. You are ignorant of your fullness, and this is the cause of all the problems. Therefore, to liberate yourself from this thraldom of the pairs of opposites, the victimization of the pairs of opposites in the world, you can't go and mess around with the world. This is what modern scientists, technologists, economists are all doing. They're trying to set right the world. You can't set right the world because the nature of the world will always be what it is. Pairs of opposites. The only thing you can do to liberate yourself from it is gain knowledge of your fullness. And this is the entire Vedantic path. Once you gain knowledge of your fullness, you will get totally liberated from the dvandvas, the pairs of opposites. See, every one of us experiences these pairs of opposites. The other day, an industrialist here in Bombay picked up a few hundred books of ours which are displayed outside and sent them to all his friends, business contacts, this, that and the other. And before you knew it, he was flooded with letters of appreciation, this, that and the other, which he compiled and passed on to me. And this piece of paper is right here in front of me. And he is the chairman of a company, very prominent industrialist, so who will he send to others like him? So he got responses from all the high and mighty, what do you call it? Page 3ers. Saying it's an excellent book and this is a classic and I've greatly benefited from it. Very, very effusive, very full of praise. This evening, just before I left home to come here, I got another letter from a gentleman in Calcutta. I've just returned from Calcutta. There was a lecture there. And he has written a letter condemning me, damning me. You have no business to talk such things. Complete nonsense you've spoken. Dvandvas. If I am dependent on praise, if I am attached and I am desirous of people saying good things, what will happen to me? I'll get tossed by the dvandvas. So when I get this letter praising me, I'll go up in the clouds, and this letter that I came just before I came here, I'll be so depressed I won't be able to speak on the Gita. Right? So the sensible thing is to understand when people send praises, there's one of two possibilities. They are praising because the industrialist who sent the book, they have to praise him. So indirectly they're praising the book. Or if they're genuinely praising, they're praising the subject, which is the Bhagavad Gita. It had nothing to do with me. The condemning letter that I get, I must understand that this is the mindset of the person who's sending it. Maybe he was in a bad mood when he sent that letter. It has nothing to do with me. So when you disconnect from it, disconnect from your own attachment, disconnect from your own desires, whatever happens in the world, the best and the worst will not affect you. Incidentally, I'm not asking you to take a look at these books because of these complimentary letters that have come, but this ignorance that we have needs to be removed on a war footing. Whatever else you do or don't do, this must be done. And therefore it is important that we gain knowledge. The knowledge is there in the books. Knowledge is there in the CDs, and all of which are displayed outside. Get it for yourself. Give it as gifts, like this industrialist gave the book as gifts, and he says, nothing in my life that I've given has ever got such an overwhelming response. Why? Because the content, the Gita. Now that you have benefited, you can help in passing the knowledge. You have to give gifts anyway, right? So what do you give as a gift? Flowers or mithai? That is the worst. The other day in, where was it? Here in Bombay. A lady told me, mithai is the worst gift that you can give because you put on weight. And she said, whenever we got mithai, we used to give it to the servants and drivers and all that. And now I can't do that because my maid turns around and told me the other day, Mem Sahab, please don't give mithai because then it leads to my putting on weight. So that avenue also is gone. So what can you give? You can only give books, you can give knowledge, you can give something that they will not just throw away. That will remain with them all their lives. So anyway, you liberate yourself by gaining knowledge and then you adhyatma nitya. You get established in the self. You're ever rooted in the self. Thought of the self continues while the body acts, perceives and acts, while the mind feels, while the intellect thinks. This is called classical living. Just as classical music is when a person attunes to one note, sa, and only when that attunement to that note is complete, whole, the concentration is fixed there, that the musician can render wonderful compositions set to varied ragas and different beats, talas. But if that initial attunement is not there, the note slips. And when the note slips, what you hear is not music but noise. You don't hear classical music, you hear bathroom singing. So this is the difference. Are you living a life of classical living or are you living an ordinary life? And in order to live classically, you need to attune to the thought of the self while you go through these experiences. And as we go along, he then tells us, how do you achieve this attunement? Verse 6.
Na tad bhasayate suryaha na shashanko na pavakaha yad gatva na nivartante tadham paramam mama.
The sun does not illumine that, nor the moon or fire. That is my supreme abode, which having attained, they do not return. You know, many of the verses in the Gita are taken directly from an Upanishad, a mantra in the Upanishad. The very first verse in which he compares, he gives this imagery of the Asvattha tree, it has been taken directly from Katha Upnishad. This verse is another one which has been taken from Katha Upnishad, where he says, Na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. So what he's saying here, which he's taken from Katha Upnishad, is that the sun does not illumine that. The light of the sun can illumine everything in the world except Atman, because Atman is that power which lends light to the sun. So also with the moon, Shashanka, Shasha Anka means the mark of a rabbit. If you look up at the moon, you'll see the shape of a rabbit. That's why they call the moon Shashanka. Sun is an example of direct light. The moon is an example of indirect light. Then he says fire, pavakaha, is created, invoked light. All the sun and the moon are natural light, the fire is created. All three are illumined by Atman, but you cannot see Atman, they don't illumine Atman. Atman is sakrut vibhutam, self-illumined. So this light represents consciousness. Atman is that conscious principle which makes you conscious of everything, whether it is sight, whether it is sound, whether it is feelings, whether it is thoughts, whatever it be. Atman is that which illumines them. once you understand Atman, once you get to that conscious principle, Yadgatva nanivartante, throughout the Gita he keeps saying the same thing. This is the second time in the 15th chapter where he's brought this. Having gone there, there is no return. Why does he give us this assurance? Because it is a difficult process. Once you move up, there is no coming back. Once a person who lives in the slums and the filth and the squalor evolves to a different kind of lifestyle, he can never get back to the filth and squalor. Once you become aware of cleanliness, you can't get back to the previous state. So this is spiritual evolution. It's not only in terms of realization. Every step you take is like crossing a bridge where behind you the bridge dissolves. So there's no going back. Yad gatva nanivartan tad dhama paramam mama. That is my supreme abode. Just as the mind is the supreme abode of the dreamer, Atman, Brahman is my supreme abode. When he says my supreme abode, he doesn't mean Krishna's supreme abode. He means each one should say that. Each one of us should say that. It is my supreme abode. So, having said this, now he moves to verse 7.
Mamaivansho jivaloke jivabhuta sanatanaha manashasthani vyani prakriti sari karshati.
Having become a jiva, jiva means individual, like you and me, in the world of the living, dwelling in prakriti, matter, an eternal portion of myself attracts the senses with mind as the sixth. Now, he's put it in a complicated manner. Put simply, all that it means is, when Atman, which is a portion of the eternal self, Brahman, but when he says portion of the eternal self, it doesn't mean like you have 100 units and only 2 units have come apart. Because Atman and Brahman are one. He only means it in a matter of speech. But the eternal being identifies with Prakriti, matter. And this combination of Atman and Prakriti, matter, creates the living being, you and me. You and I are nothing but a combination of spirit and matter, Atman and Prakriti. Prakriti means vasanas. Just as when the sun, the rays, identify with a reflecting medium, a reflected sun is created. So in the same way, Atman combined with matter creates the individual, you and me. Now with this verse, what he's done is he's moved to the second portion, which is Brahman is the individual. The first 6 verses deal with the universe, the macrocosm. He says the macrocosm is Brahman. Now he's moved to the individual, how that Brahman identifies with matter and becomes an individual. The same Brahman which identifies with matter in the universe and becomes this macrocosm. So these few verses 7 to 11 deal with this. Now what is he saying? The problem is in the identification. When Atman identifies with the body, you become a perceiver and actor, become a physical personality. Having become a physical personality, your interactions with the world are all based on physical things. So what do you see? You see physical things. You see a person is fat or thin, you see whether a person is well dressed or not well dressed, good looking or otherwise. You don't see anything beyond it. The same individual, say Atman identified with the mind becomes a feeler, and then you enter the realm of emotions. You become an emotional personality, and wherever you go, whatever you do, you're only transacting with emotions. You see a nice person or a vicious person. That's all that you see. So you're able to go one step further beyond the physical and see emotions. But then you get stuck there at the level of the feelings. When Atman identifies with the intellect, gross intellect, you become a thinker and an intellectual personality. The same Atma, so as an intellectual personality, you only see ideas and ideologies, and then you're analytical and you examine them, and you are, that's the realm that you are in. The same Atman identifying with the subtle intellect becomes a contemplator. Hopefully all of us are at that stage right now, at least temporarily. And then you are able to move the focus of your attention from the world to that which is beyond the world. All this put together, we are all different beings at different periods of time. All this put together is the individual. So what is the problem? The problem is created by the identification. Wherever you identify, you get caught up in that state, and then you get affected. So what he's saying here is, the sun is one, the reflections are many. If you focus on the reflections, you get affected, you pass through the thraldom of joy, sorrow, etc. At any stage in your life, you switch your attention to the original sun, Atman, you move back, withdraw, withhold from all of this and go back to Atman, you become immune to the world. How do you do that? We move to verse 8. He continues with the individual.
Shariram yadavapnoti yachapyutkramatishvaraha gruhitvaitani sayati vayudandhani vashayat.
This individual has been created by a combination of Atman, spirit and Prakriti, matter. What happens then? When the Lord enters and leaves a body, he takes these and goes as the wind carries the fragrances from their abode. So now he is gone into the theory of reincarnation. Ishvara, Lord, normally means Atman, the Godhood in us. But in this verse, when he says Lord, he cannot mean Atman, because Atman is an all-pervading entity, and anything that is all-pervading cannot move. Movement is possible only from a place where you exist to a place where you don't exist. Since Atman exists everywhere, there is no place to which Atman can move, and therefore this whole thing falls through the moment he says when the Lord enters and leaves a body. So what does he mean by enters and leaves a body? He is speaking of the causal body and subtle body, means vasanas, mind and intellect. So your feelings, your thoughts, and the quality of your feelings or thoughts which are determined by the vasanas. Do you understand what vasanas are? A very simple way of understanding vasanas is unmanifest desires. It is only when the vasana gets manifested in your mind as a thought, are you conscious of it, are you aware of it, and then you can decide whether to act on it or how far to act on it, etc. But as long as it is in the dormant state, unmanifest state, you cannot be aware of it. Like for instance, right now, we're a collection of different types of people. One of you might be a musician. You obviously have musical vasanas, but you don't start singing here. I hope not. Why? Because that vasana for music is dormant. Another person may have a vasana for art, a third person for sport. All of these vasanas, other than the vasana for the Bhagavad Gita, have gone into the dormant state. At that state, it is just pure ignorance, vasana. The moment it starts manifesting, it then gets into the level of mind and intellect. So when he says the Lord, he means vasanas, mind and intellect, your inner personality. Your inner personality enters and leaves a body. How does this happen? He says he takes these and goes. Takes these means takes your inner personality and goes as the wind carries the fragrances from their abode. In fact, the meaning of vasana is fragrance. It's the, what do they call it now? Modern vibes, right? So when you meet a person, you get a distinct flavor of the personality, and that flavor, that fragrance as they call it, is what exudes from you And that's dependent on the mix of vasanas that you have. So therefore it's called fragrance. Now, how does this happen? Let's take, he's talking about birth and death, he's talking about the theory of reincarnation. But before we get into that, let's understand, in our lifetime,